In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Today we've heard the story of the blind man outside Jericho, and it was a little while ago, so I'll just remind you. So the reading is that at that time, when Jesus drew near to Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. And hearing a multitude going by, he inquired what this meant. They told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by, and he cried, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. And those who were in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he came near, Jesus asked him, what do you want me to do for you? He said, Lord, let me receive my sight. And Jesus said to him, receive your sight, your faith has made you well. And immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. Now, this story, because it's about the blind man and then all the other people, there's an image here of blindness and sight. It's kind of the main theme that we're seeing here, blindness and sight. But just to make it a little bit clearer why this story is here, in the context of the passage, and we should always remember that these passages, we look at them and they've got, chapter headings and verses, numbers and all those sorts of things. But in ancient times, of course, none of that existed. So when these lectionaries were put together, you just had this passage. And people, because they would have heard and been familiar with the scriptures, at least some people would have been, they knew the context of that, right? They knew where it came from, so they knew what was around it. And so when we listen to these readings, even if we read it in church, we should go home even before or after and just read what was around it, because it helps us to understand what's going on in that particular gospel reading. And just before this one, Jesus has taken his disciples aside and he said to them privately, I'm going up to Jerusalem. I'm going to be beaten, spat upon and crucified and die and rise on the third day. He's just told them all of this. And the scripture and the gospel says they didn't understand anything that he said. It was all hidden from them. They had no idea, right? They just don't know what's going on. So when this man is crying out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Son of David, Jesus, Son of David. This is a messianic title. So he's saying, he's recognizing Jesus as the Messiah. His own disciples don't really have a proper idea of this, even though they've been with him for over 3 years, right? So he's calling this out. They should have been listening, but they're not listening. The people who should know the best who he is, the people should understand this man who's been walking with them for 3 years, he's not just a man, he's God, They should know it, but they don't. But the blind man, he might not know that he's God necessarily, but he knows he's the Messiah. He's being faithful to the tradition of his forefathers, which is the Messiah is coming. The Messiah is coming and he's going to bring salvation and healing and all of these things. So when he calls out, Jesus ignores all of the people saying, don't listen to him, be quiet, he's just annoying. Ignores all of them and he calls to him to himself and says, what do you want? He said, I want to receive my sight. He says, receive your sight, your faith has made you well. Faith here we can often understand as faithfulness. Faithfulness means his faithfulness to the belief that the Messiah would come and bring healing and bring all of these things. His faithfulness to those things. So we see the contrast here between the blind man who can't see physically, but who does have his spiritual eyes opened to the reality. And we see all of the people who ought to have their spiritual eyes open to reality, but actually they're blind. That's the main theme that we get from this reading today. Now, I think I might have given the sermon on this one a couple of times before, and I might have said exactly the same thing. And this time I was thinking about it a little bit more, and I was thinking, there's got to be something deeper here. Where can we go a little bit deeper into this? And I thought, of course, blindness is not just something that was happening to people back then. Spiritual blindness. It is, of course, something that we suffer from today. All of us do. None of us see really clearly. None of us. We all have at least partial blindness when it comes to spiritually, but a lot of us are really, really blind. We don't see much of the world, and it's been exacerbated by modernity. In the modern world, especially since, say, I don't know, post-Second World War at least, the world's become extremely materialist. We've basically, even people in the church who know that there is a spiritual world, have more or less put it aside. Even though we know it's there, it's like, yeah, but it doesn't have anything to do with our lives, right, most of the time. We live in this world, we just touch things, we walk around, we deal with the things that we see, that's it, you know. We live like materialists most of the time. Now, that's my generation of people who are probably more like that. But apparently, recently, it's becoming a little bit different. Because younger people, younger than me, who have grown up in the internet age and they've had access to technology and all those things, they're not going down the path of... They've seen materialism, they've grown up with it, they've known nothing else, a lot of them. And now what are they seeing? They actually see that that's empty and that it has no meaning, and they're looking for something more. Now, I don't know, a lot of you young guys, maybe it's the same with you. You've seen that the materialist kind of story doesn't really provide any kind of meaning in life. It doesn't provide any depth. And people are looking for that. And what they're looking for is a sense of the numinous. They're looking for a sense of the spiritual reality that is there. It's never gone away, but we just don't see it anymore. People are looking for that. And unfortunately, many people are going to the occult. A good number of people are coming into the church, which is great, but a lot of people are now turning to the occult. So this is now not a problem of whether people believe in God or just don't believe in anything. It's becoming more a case of whether people believe in the God that we believe in or believe in something else entirely, right? But certainly something spiritual, something to do with the occult. So what matters is the voices that we listen to. The voices that we listen to are important. Just like that blind man, when he's crying out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. He's being very specific. That voice is very specific. Jesus, Son of David, the Messiah. That's the one that those people should have listened to. But they were listening to other things. They're listening to their own desires, their own whatever. They're listening to something else. We have to be very careful about the things that we listen to. The things that we listen to are going to guide us in our path in life. They're going to direct us. What we see, what we hear, all of those things. And that blindness that we all experience can be, our eyes can be opened if we walk along the path the church has actually provided for us to walk along. That path involves limits. I was reading this morning something by Paul Kingsnorth, and many of you may have read before. He's saying our culture that we're living in now is a culture which has given up all kind of limits in anything that was traditional in terms of the Christian life, right? So there's no sexuality, food, alcohol, drugs, whatever it is. Anything and everything is basically open, right? There's not really any limits there anymore. What we have, or what we desire in the church, is a culture of limits. The culture of limits limits our senses to certain things, limits our eating to a certain amount, limits our sight to certain things only, limits our hearing to certain things only. The culture of limits is what allows us to actually concentrate on what's important. Now, I was thinking about this because the internet age has given us an incredible amount of distraction, of any and all types of distraction. A lot of it destructive, not all of it destructive, but a lot of it quite destructive. And we have this open to us all the time through this thing. It's in my pocket. If I'm bored, I take it out, I look at it. It's a distraction machine. It's just there all the time. And I think that for us particularly right now, when I was thinking about the blind man, something that really struck me this time was the fact that he's blind means that his other senses, of course, are going to be heightened. So when he's listening, he's sitting at the side of that road every day, but he's listening to what's going on. He knows every sound, every single sound that goes along, because if you're a blind person, that's what you have, is you've got your other senses as well, but your hearing is going to be really important. He knows every sound. So when something comes along that's a bit different, he recognises it straight away. He picks it up, right? He's very sensitive because of that. It's also the case, I mean, this is just a historical thing. If you want to go back and look at history, you'll find that in all kinds of cultures that people who acted as mediums for spirits, many of them were blind for the same reason, because their senses are concentrated on hearing. They are more contemplative by nature, right? There's nothing much you can do except think about things and whatever when you're hearing stuff, right? So this is just a feature of things. Now, we're obviously not blind. Most of us are not blind, and we're not going to go and pluck our eyes out. But we do need to intentionally introduce some kind of blindness, if you like, to our own lives. That is to say, excuse me, we have to deliberately cut off our vision for certain things, at least for certain times. We need to restrict ourselves so that we can concentrate on Christ, on the word that he gives us, on all of those things, so that our hearts will actually become more attuned to be able to hear when things are happening. Like the blind man is hearing Jesus coming, he's asking what's going on because it's different, right? If we're so distracted all the time, we can't hear any of that. We don't have a sense of what's going on around us, apart from what's in front of us on the screen. So very important, I think, because of the age that we live in, to be very intentional about what we look at and what we listen to, but especially what we look at. So when we're fasting, of course we fast from food, that's part of the practices of the church, but probably we also need to fast from our technology as well. We also need to really think about how we use that technology. It can be a gateway for great things. There's a lot of good stuff on the internet. There's a lot of terrible things on there as well. And even the good things can be a distraction from what's really important. I was listening to Rod Dreher. Some of you may know Rod Dreher is a well-known Orthodox author, and he's written a new book called, I think, Living in Wonder or something like that. And he's talking about this whole kind of topic. And his basic conclusion, he's talking about the problems of the age with technology and people, you know, they're trying to get a sense of the numinous or sense of the spiritual world, but kind of looking at all kinds of different places. He's saying, what can we do? What we can do is learn to concentrate. Learn to concentrate on something very specific. For example, the Jesus prayer. He gave a story about in his life when he was a very intellectual guy. He said the Jesus prayer for a long time. His priest told him to say it. That took him out of his head and gave him a bigger sense of the world and actually opened him up. So that concentration on something like the Jesus prayer or reading scriptures or other things, that type of activity where we are concentrating on what is actually going to bring us salvation, increasing that amount of time in our lives and cutting off the other things, even when they're seemingly good, is the way that's going to help us to actually see more clearly in the spiritual world. The spiritual world itself is always there. It's never gone anywhere. We just don't see it. We've cut ourselves off from it by all the stuff that we do, all the distractions that we have. So we need to walk it back. We need to say, okay, enough of the distractions. Let's try and cut things down to what was really important and walk along that path. In doing so, we will find more and more that the strangeness of the world will just start to appear to us. All the things that people really want. They want spiritual experiences. They want all of that stuff. You walk along this path and you'll find that the strangeness of the world is actually a very strange place. You might not think so, but it is a very, very strange, wonderful kind of place. that we don't fully experience because we've cut ourselves off from the experience of it. So let's make sure that we actually really try and cut ourselves off from things that are distracting and concentrate on what is good for us in terms of our salvation, and our eyes will be opened up to the reality, the great reality of this world that God has created for us and for everybody else. And as we become like that, other people can see that that's what's happening there. That's what's happening in that church. That's what's happening with those people. You know, their eyes are open. The reality of this world is being made known in that place. I'll go there. I won't go down to the place and buy some crystals, you know, or go and see a medium or get my tarot cards read or something. I'll go to a church where I can see that people there are in touch with the spiritual world. It's being revealed to them in the services. But not only that, their lives are being changed in such a way that I can see that it's good. Their lives are being transformed. They love people. They love one another. They do good. You know, all of those things. People can see that. So I would encourage you to walk in that path, cut off the distractions, and we'll try and everyone. If we can do that, then I think all of us together will grow into a far more effective force in this world through that kind of experience of being closer and closer to Christ. Amen.